Do you know why I named you Shadow?
Maria?
Because without light, there's only darkness. But a shadow will show you where to find the light. Do you understand? I don't want you to be driven by darkness. I want you to be happy. Stand in the light with peace in your heart.
If the ultimate life form is the shadow, then what does that make Maria, Rouge, Omega, and Gerald Robotnik? In our last video, we asked a similar question. If Sonic is the wind, then what does that make Tails, Amy, and Knuckles? But this was directed to Sonic and his aspect of being the wind, and how we could use similar concepts of elements and parts of nature, directly or indirectly related to the wind, to describe his close friends. So today we're doing the same, but for Shadow, and the ones connected to him. And this is where our first difference lies. You see, for Sonic, we wanted to have him act as a sort of pillar, an origin that we can work off of, as Tails, Amy, and Knuckles are so intrinsically tied to him as a character. And while characters like Shadow are obviously tied to Sonic in both a thematic and story sense, we felt that it would be more fitting and more fun to have Shadow be his own pillar. A pillar that we can use to connect the characters that are closest to him. And the first one we need to focus on is the girl who named Shadow herself, Maria Robotnik. So, if the ultimate life form is the shadow, then what does that make Maria? But in order to understand what could best represent Maria, we first need to elaborate on Shadow's core thematic concept and understand the sheer beauty of why the ultimate life form, the pinnacle of power and evolution, is even being compared to a mere shadow in the first place, as this answer will make it quite clear what Maria represents. So, do you know what makes Shadow the ultimate life form? Maybe it's the intrinsic power over chaos. Wielding unlimited power and being able to bend space and time at will is definitely no small feat. Or maybe it's his speed. Being compared to the fastest living creature on the planet, at times even giving him a run for his money, has gotta land you the title of ultimate life form, right? Or maybe it's just because he's so darn cool. Well, yeah, actually, it's all of those things. What makes Shadow the ultimate life form is his power, his speed, intelligence, and abilities. But another important aspect of why Shadow is the ultimate life form is because of what he represents: hope. A shadow will show you where to find the light. Without a shadow, it means the light is gone and there is only darkness. But as long as there is even a sliver of light or a slim chance for something good, then there is a shadow. Then there is hope. Shadow is hope. He is a symbol, and with his immortality, it is a symbol, a hope that never dies. Without hope, faith, belief, we can do nothing. With it, we can do all things. Hope is the ultimate power, and so it stands that the ultimate being, the pinnacle of evolution, is the one who exemplifies the ultimate power, the one that can do all things as they serve as hope incarnate. In the secret diary of Professor Gerald Robotnik, that was recovered and restored by Professor Victoria, this is literally and exactly what Gerald wanted Shadow to be. In entry number 620, it reads, "When I launched Project Shadow, initially I named it with scorn and mockery. I was trying to grab hold of an intangible goal. Later it sounded appropriately villainous as I was toying with the fundamentals of life itself. But then Maria looked upon the unfinished specimen and put things into a whole new perspective. A shadow tells you which way to go to find the light. In an instant, she cut through all my pessimism and doubt and filled me with hope. Shadow, as she's come to call him, will not be some dark creature, but a champion of life and hope. Shadow is hope. The hope for humanity, for all cures, all life, for Maria. A hope that never dies. This is why the ultimate life form is compared to a shadow. It's utterly gorgeous because out of all the things hope can be, tying it to a shadow is by far one of the deepest and coolest pieces of symbolism that Sonic Team has ever done. And on top of that, tying it to a character like Shadow the Hedgehog? Like, sure, Sonic inspires hope 100%, and Silver, Amy, Cream, Tangle, and more are all about that hope-filled energy, for sure. But using Shadow the Hedgehog as the representation of hope in this franchise, man, truth be told, it just amazes us how deeply thoughtful a franchise about a fast-moving, chili dog-loving hedgehog can be sometimes. So, now that we see Shadow's thematic concept of a shadow as also being hope, it tells us pretty clearly what Maria is. Maria is quite simply the light. She is the sun. She is the representation of all things good, where hope comes from. Hope is the product of good, just as a shadow is the product of light, and just as Shadow is the product of Maria. After all, it was Maria who named Shadow. Although it was Gerald and even partly Black Zoom who were responsible for the biological creation of Shadow, his desires, his wants, emotions, name, ideals, the way he thinks, interacts, loves, breathes, it is all thanks to Maria. Shadow is a hero, a savior, all because of her light. A light so warm, loving, and genuine that everyone around her couldn't help but be filled with joy. In entry number 162 of Gerald Robotnik's journal, it reads, "I can't believe how much time has passed. It feels like yesterday I was celebrating my boys becoming men, and now I'm a grandfather. Her name is Maria, and she is perfect in every way. She brings a smile to everyone's face, and everyone falls in love with her the moment they lay eyes on her. Maria as light and the bringer of hope works so well because she is literally like the sun, a bright force that warms the heart, calms the mind, and spreads positivity just by being in its presence." In entry number 428, it reads, "Despite everything, she remains the most positive person in the room. Most of the staff here left their families back on Earth, so I worried she'd feel lonely. Instead, she's become the adoptive daughter of every researcher on the Ark." And in entry number 589, it reads, "Maria is growing into a lovely young woman. It breaks my heart that someone as bright and energetic as her is diminished by disease. There are no visible effects, and I've caught my fellow researchers muttering to each other, doubting her illness. It is infuriating. I find all my reason and restraint vanishes when she's slighted. And yet, she remains an unending force of positivity. Even on her worst days, when the fear and the pain take hold, she tells me she endures for the day when she can return home. She has total faith in me, and that Project Shadow will cure her. Despite everything she's going through, she never loses that light. So yes, if the ultimate life form is the shadow, then Maria is the unending force of light in which the shadow emerges from, the pure force of good in which hope emerges from, bringing peace to all of humanity, a sun brightening even the darkest of days." But that all begs the question, if the ultimate life form is the shadow and Maria is the sun, then what does that make Rouge the Bat? But before that, thank you all so much for your support on the last video. It means the world to us that you all enjoyed it so much that you took the time to come up with your own interpretations on what could represent Sonic and his friends. There were so many comments and so many amazing takes that we couldn't possibly reply to them all, but we've spent hours reading a bunch of them and will continue to do so. We also got inspired from those comments and want to ask you, what would you use to best describe certain combinations of Sonic characters? As some of you love the idea of Amy being fire, and so Sonic and Amy together could be a firestorm, which is an intense fire that creates its own wind system. But what about Sonic and Shadow, Silver and Blaze, or even Tikal and Chaos? And only if it's worth your time, and if you really want to see more, please consider subscribing because it does more for us than you know. Now back to Rouge. While writing the script and researching for this video, we came across something very peculiar. We learned that Rouge's original name was actually going to be Shadow. For those of you who already know this fun fact, bear with us for a moment, because this realization, at least for us, puts a whole new perspective on the relationship dynamic between Shadow and Rouge. One that can help us better understand what element or part of nature would best describe her character. So yeah, for those who don't know, back then, Shadow was originally going to be named Terios, and his design was different too. That's what that alternate skin DLC was about for Shadow Generations. So we were going to get Terios the Hedgehog and Shadow the Bat, until something happened with production and they decided to give the name Shadow to the dark and brooding hedgehog we all know and love. But why was Rouge's name going to be Shadow? Obviously, yes, she sneaks around in darkness and steals a bunch, so her name being Shadow makes perfect sense, as she's the first character in the series to be inspired by spies, sneaking, and thievery and stuff. But it's fascinating that both of these characters have shared the same name, and it's even more fascinating when we take into account the special dynamic that they share with each other. Rouge and Shadow have an unshakable bond built on trust and respect.
Shadow? Even if you believe everyone in the world will be against you, know that I'll always remain by your side. Remember that.
I will.
But there are two other elements to this. both that are unique only to Rouge. But before that, we need to take a look at how Shadow interacts with other characters in the series. Shadow has worked with characters from Team Sonic, he tolerates them and in some degree respects them, especially Sonic, as that's the only one Shadow considers his rival. He's interacted with Team Chaotix and doesn't really think much of them. He probably hates Charmer, to be honest. He respects Silver and Blaze as well, but not as much for him to consider them rivals. But he knows to never hold back against them, since he knows how formidable and driven they can be. For Team Rose, he just sees Cream as a young, helpless girl, and for Amy, he senses her good-natured spirit, and in some ways it reminds him of Maria. That doesn't make them close, but it makes Shadow have an appreciation for her goals of wanting to help others, as that is what Shadow aims to do as well, since that was his promise to Maria. For Big, we think Shadow is just genuinely confused every time he interacts with him. The point we're trying to make is that the only people Shadow considers his close allies are Omega and Rouge. Obvious, we know. But Rouge is even more special. You see, he respects both of their skills, abilities, and drive. He sees them both as the only capable allies for the ultimate life form. Allies he knows he can count on, even when the world is ending. But the difference between how he treats Rouge and Omega lies in those two elements we mentioned earlier, the two that are unique to Rouge. And those elements are sympathy and protection. Let's start with sympathy. Out of everyone else in the cast, Rouge shows the most sympathy and care towards Shadow.
Shadow? Hey, Omega. Did I ever tell you that Shadow is a robot and... Oh, never mind. Good luck.
Yeah, he did it! The Black Comet is destroyed!
Shadow, that was sweet.
I hope he's okay.
I'm sure he's fine, Rouge. After all, he is Shadow.
She's open with him more than anyone else and is the only one who can really get Shadow to open up. She can reason with him and he'll stop to listen.
Now about the spacecraft, I can take you to a ship, but in return you're going to have to promise to come to Sonic's birthday party. I'll take that as a yes. Now then, interested in raiding a gun base?
And this is really odd, considering that Rouge is an infamous jewel thief. She selfishly steals from others for her own gain. She uses, seduces, and manipulates those to get what she wants. She's sassy and has no problem beating those who get in her way. But at the same time, we can tell that she has a heart, but rarely does she wear it on her sleeve. She shows concern for others, sure, but never with the same level of compassion as with Shadow. She shares her concerns with him, her worries. We don't know much about Rouge's past. In fact, we really don't know anything at all. We don't know why she became a thief, why she acts the way she does. Was she on a path of revenge like Shadow? Who knows? Did she have a troubled past that haunted her? Maybe. We don't know. But what we do know is that for some reason, she can connect with Shadow on a personal level more than any other character can. She knows that deep down, Shadow really cares about people and just doesn't often show it. But surprisingly, only for her, he does show that care. This is that second unique element we mentioned, protection. Shadow is so protective of Rouge, going out of his way to make sure she's safe even if it puts him in danger. He doesn't extend this same level of care to Omega. Yes, Omega is a literal killing machine who can survive his entire head being chopped off, but still, they're all part of Team Dark. And yet, Rouge is the only one he shares this level of compassion with. He's quiet and focused about it, but Rouge can see through that dark exterior and appreciates him for it.
Why so melancholy? That was so unexpected. So unlike you, Shadow, to come and rescue me. But your ability to use the chaos control certainly comes in handy.
You know, I didn't come to save you. I came back for the Chaos Emeralds.
Yeah, but then again, that's not the whole story, is it?
And it's also quite telling that she's the only one who can give Shadow orders. He doesn't always listen, but she is the leader of Team Dark for a reason. She's the heart of the group and keeps Shadow and Omega from getting too violent and destructive. Rouge is special to Shadow, and Shadow is special to Rouge. And that's why it's so fascinating that these two characters even share the same name. They even debut together in the same game. They are, by design, meant to share a special bond with each other. So with everything we've said here, we believe we know exactly what element or part of nature could best describe Rouge the Bat. Have you ever heard of a shade-loving flower? These are flowers that prefer to grow in shaded, low-light areas, rather than the bright and sunny areas of typical flowers. There are a variety of flower species that bring this splash of color to the more dim areas of nature, but the one we want to focus on is the flower species known as the bleeding heart. This heart-shaped flower is what we believe could best describe Rouge the Bat. While these heart flowers are able to grow in the light if given enough cool air and moisture, they much prefer partial or even full shade to grow in. Much like how Rouge can still operate in the day and work with the sunniest of the cast, but she thrives in the discreetness that shadows provide, and excels when working with those of a more dark disposition. Like Rouge, these flowers are a beauty to behold, and yet they can be deadly when treated with carelessness. These flowers hold a poisonous toxin that can be harmful to humans and animals who don't tread with caution. Rouge herself is the same way, as she is an intoxicating beauty who should not be treated lightly. The flower itself is shaped as a heart, which is a design element shared with Rouge, as she has a heart-shaped chest plate as well as heart-tipped boots. And Rouge, like we mentioned earlier, is also the heart of Team Dark. And this heart-shaped flower is, again, a shade-loving flower. It prefers the dark. But what's most telling here is what the bleeding heart flower symbolizes. This heart-shaped flower has represented both positive and negative meanings throughout culture. It symbolizes vulnerability and compassion, a willingness to be open with your emotions and to express a deep sense of love and respect. But at the same time, these flowers represent rejection and a longing for emotional connection. This perfectly encapsulates the dynamic between Rouge and Shadow. Two individuals who thrive in darkness, Shadow being rejected by the world for what he is, and yet, deep down, still wanting to feel that genuine emotional connection he once had with Maria. And Rouge being seemingly rejected as well, as before Shadow, she didn't seem to have anyone else she cared about other than herself. Just a lonely thief cast out by the world because of her selfish desire for jewels. And yet, we can see that regardless of her deviously ditzy demeanor, she does care about the well-beings of others and wants to form connections. And these two are able to have that with each other. They share moments of vulnerability and compassion, a want, a need to protect each other emotionally and physically from the darkness of this world. Rouge's influence on Shadow is akin to that of a bleeding heart flower in the shade. It's comforted by the shade and can grow from it, and by that same token, the once empty shade can be filled with color and life. If the ultimate life form is the Shadow, then Rouge is the bleeding heart flower that grows within it.
All this for what? Nothing? I might as well go look for that Master Emerald, since that irritating Echidna is here.
Some things never change, do they?
What are you saying? What else is a famous treasure hunter supposed to do?
And now it's time to move on to the third member of Team Dark, the powerhouse holding a relentless vengeance for Dr. Eggman, the ultimate killing machine, Omega.
E123 Omega here. Extermination proceeding without incident. Execute. I am unstoppable.
Omega. I know we usually build up to the answer, but this time around it's necessary to understand what sort of thematic concept, element, or part of nature fits Omega early on.
What?
So we're just gonna come right out and say it. Our thematic concept to represent Omega is metal.
Denied.
We know that seems pretty obvious, but we actually chose metal to represent Omega for reasons you wouldn't think.
Unable to process.
But first, let's get the obvious ones out of the way.
Hurry up.
He is a heavily armored machine made of metal. Like metal, he's strong and impenetrable.
I am Omega, the ultimate E-Series robot.
Metal is commonly utilized when crafting weapons of mass destruction, which also fits Omega to a T, as someone who revels in annihilation.
Annihilation completed.
Metal is also often used to describe something as heartless or emotionless, with terms like cold as steel.
I will prove to be the superior robot in all forms of competition. Cry about it on your own time.
Or when describing someone who is ruthless and lacks mercy, with terms like iron-hearted.
Negative. Race parameters do not permit alliances. Mercy is tantamount to friendliness.
While Omega is far from emotionless,
destroying robots brings me joy. It should bring you joy as well.
He definitely lacks the compassion and heart of the other cast.
Yeah, but I have robot friends too, you know?
Disgusting. You should tell me where they live.
In fact, while Shadow may sometimes be brooding, Lanolin and Whisper usually reserved or stone-faced, it's Omega who leads the charge as a merciless killing machine who secludes emotion, unless that emotion is rage.
Worthless consumer model, initiating road_rage.exe.
So, common phrases such as, your heart is as cold as steel, works for a machine like him. A machine created by Eggman bent on delivering cold, desolate destruction instead of warmth.
Irrelevant. I will win, and then inform your next of kin.
But again, none of this, even though it fits Omega pretty darn well, is why we chose metal for Omega in the first place. But if it's not any of these reasons, then why metal? Well, Omega was a bit of a tricky one, as we really wanted whatever concept we came up with to somehow connect to Shadow being a shadow. And metal is not related to shadows all that much thematically. So, even though metal as a concept was great, it wasn't enough for us. But when we dove into the other facets of metal, specifically its reflective potential when it comes to specular metal, also known as highly reflective or mirror-like metal, we found that the unique relationship between Omega and Shadow could actually be found within the relationship between various specular metal and shadows. And it's this relationship that led us to stick with metal. You see, specular metal acts as a mirror, with its appearance entirely determined by its surroundings. Unless there are shadows surrounding this metal, the metal itself does not possess a strong sense of self, and instead appears as a reflection of its environment. In a symbolic sense, you could say that without the shadow, the metal's identity is not its own, and is instead controlled by other things around it. And in our case, E123 Omega, the last of Eggman's robots to be built within his E100 series, was built for the sole purpose of safeguarding Shadow, who Eggman had found and sealed away after the events of SA2. As such, Omega himself was also sealed away, wasting away in a locked room without any freedom to do as he wished. No control over his own life, no choice in his path or in the type of machine he wanted to be, and instead, his entire being determined by others, like Eggman, around him. Despite his powers, abilities, and potential, he was left unused and unacknowledged, and this filled him with a hatred that inspired revenge. But thanks to Shadow, his path was set off course and towards another that let his own sense of self shine through. Not that he wants to stop seeking revenge or anything, but what we mean to say is that while Shadow was not directly responsible for helping Omega realize his own identity, as it was Omega himself who made the choice to go against his creator, it is Shadow who has always served as a leading figure for breaking free from others' restraints and defining oneself. In fact, that's Shadow's whole deal in 05 and Heroes. The theme of I know who I am and not letting your past or others define you. Being who you want to be, not who others want you to be. Sonic and friends have always inspired you to be yourself, but just as Sonic has always served as the leading voice in freedom, Shadow was always the leading voice in the idea of defining yourself. And we can't help but feel that Omega is inspired by Shadow in some way because of this. On top of that, Shadow doesn't want to change Omega or order him around. He treats him like he's his own person. He doesn't limit his destructive tendencies or how he thinks, acts, and lives, which makes sense for someone like Shadow who hates being controlled. In fact, each of them have been manipulated to serve as tools without wills of their own. For a time, their choices, their lives, were entirely dependent on others without any sense of self, who they are, and who they wanted to be. They have a sense of kinship because of this. And again, although Shadow isn't directly responsible for Omega's choice to go against Eggman, when you take into account their similar struggles and what Shadow represents, we can't help but feel that Omega could feel motivated by Shadow in some way. In a way that, just as shadows help the appearance of specular metal to be acknowledged, Shadow helps the identity of Omega be acknowledged through leading by example. Better yet, serving as an example, as someone whose entire being was controlled, forgotten, rebirthed, and then defined by no other than Shadow himself. So, if the ultimate life form is the Shadow, then Omega is the metal, the specular metal, in which the shadows help to define.
Mission completed!
And that just about covers Team Dark. But we would like to take this idea even further with two more characters. You see, earlier we said that we wanted Shadow to serve as a sort of pillar, an origin that we can work off of to connect the ones closest to him, like Maria, Rouge, and Omega. But we would actually like to make Maria herself a second pillar. After all, it is her light that helped to create the Shadow. So if Maria is the sun, and the ultimate life form is the Shadow, then what does that make Gerald Robotnik? So, Gerald is an interesting case, as there are essentially two states to his character, his state before Maria's death and his state after. And diving deep into these two sides of his character is vital to understanding what part of nature or element we can use to best describe him. We'll first start with Gerald as he was before the death of Maria. He is such a fascinating character, as he is a direct contrast to his grandson Ivo Robotnik. Gerald is an unparalleled genius, but instead of wanting power and control, he chooses only to help people, to share his research with the world to help stop disease and disaster, to create a world of prosperity in which science can thrive and be used to help future generations. This is exactly why he wanted to construct the Ark. Its entire purpose was to be the most advanced research center where the greatest minds could come together to discover medical breakthroughs and miracle inventions that can aid humanity. This side of him is something that we can directly parallel to his granddaughter, Maria. She, like him, is a positive force, wanting only to spread happiness and healing to all of humanity. And as we established earlier, Maria is the sun that makes everything around her feel warm and bright. This same light is reflected in Gerald. But as we all know, this light would quickly be snuffed out. Maria was murdered by gun soldiers, resulting in Gerald gradually losing his mind, losing his faith in humanity, losing his light. This was his state after Maria died. He loved her more than anything, and with her gone, all he could think about was revenge. Not just revenge on Gun, not just revenge on those who kill, he wanted revenge on humanity itself. He saw them as a mistake, something only existing to eliminate what is good in this universe. So, before his own death, he took it upon himself to orchestrate the destruction of the entire world. He had two plans for this. The Ark turned mega weapon titled the Eclipse Cannon, and the Hope for Humanity turned Decimator of Doom, Shadow the Hedgehog. Now, everything is clear. To us, these two sides to Gerald spell out exactly what he is. If Maria is the sun, then Gerald is the moon. Like Gerald, the moon has two sides, a light side and a dark side. Now we call it that, but it's really the near side and far side. The near side, which we call light, faces the earth, while the far side, which we call dark, does not. The moon spins, so yes, both sides obviously are equally touched by the sun's light, but the terms light and dark side come from the phenomena known as tidal locking, in which the moon's speed of rotation and the time it takes to complete a full rotation matches with the time it takes to fully orbit around the earth in roughly a month, meaning we only ever see one side of the moon. This is the near side, and has thus been deemed the light side since we can physically see it, while the far side is considered the dark because its full appearance is lost to us. On Earth, you can only just barely see the edges of the far side depending on where you physically are during specific points in the moon cycle, unless you observe it from a rocket ship. But the point is, the near and far sides of the moon have many geological and geochemical differences, and these differences help to highlight the nature of Gerald Robotnik. The near, or light side, is the only side that reflects the sun's light back to Earth. Meanwhile, the far, or dark side, reflects it back into deep space. We can parallel this to Gerald's two character states. His light side reflected the shining light of Maria back to Earth, as ever since Maria's birth, she has served as Gerald's heart and main source of motivation that helps him stay on the path of good. However, his dark side didn't have any more warming light to give after Maria died. Instead, he only wanted to spread darkness and disaster. The near side of the moon is also filled with tons of lunar Maria, which are those large dark plains you see on the moon. These are formed by large volcanic plains and deposits of lava flowing through ancient basins, while the far side barely has any lunar Maria, leaving it to look more rugged and cratered. This reflects what we see in Gerald. It's on the nose, yes, but the light side with more Maria is warmer and full of depth, like how Gerald used to be. And the dark side without the Maria is colder, more jagged, just like how Gerald was after Maria's death. And think about when the moon completely covers the sun in a solar eclipse. The moon is literally blocking out the sun's light and creating a stretch of darkness over the earth, just like how Gerald believed that the world was no longer deserving of Maria's light and wanted to spread darkness in the form of total annihilation. So what did he do? He programmed the Eclipse Cannon to destroy the earth. There is also the phenomenon known as shadow bands that appear during the totality of a solar eclipse. These shadow bands are waves of dark gray shadows that ripple across the Earth's surface. These uncontrollable shadows match similarly, at least thematically, with what we see Gerald do to Shadow. Gerald altered Shadow's memories, causing him to act out and become an uncontrollable weapon bent on spreading destruction across the Earth. Yes, all this spacey stuff is super nerdy. Yes, this most likely wasn't on the minds of the developers when they created Gerald Robotnik as a character, but to us, the parallels just work so well. If Maria is the sun, and the ultimate life form is the shadow cast by the sun's light, then Gerald is the moon. The moon that once reflected the sun's light, but is now blocking it out entirely, casting a dark eclipse over the world.
I plan to give you a taste of my revenge once all the 7 Chaos Emeralds are collected. Once I initiate this program, it cannot be disabled. All of you ungrateful humans who took everything away from me will feel my loss and despair.
And now it's time for the final character. And if you saw our last video, then you probably already know who it is. While Shadow represents one theme, we believe that Super Shadow, like with Sonic and Supersonic, represents another. As with Supersonic, this is just the super form of Shadow, and while his character doesn't really change in any way, we aren't just dealing with Shadow himself. Now we have to take into consideration the ultimate power of the Chaos Emeralds. We concluded in Sonic's version of the video that the Chaos Emeralds serve as a means to an end and allow a character to reach a higher potential. And so with Supersonic, we expanded on Sonic's foundational motif of the wind by coming up with a concept that still matches all the themes of the wind while also being more powerful and filled with aspects of more chaotic energy. So now we'll take Shadow's foundational motif of a shadow and do the same in order to answer the question, if the ultimate life form is the shadow, then what does that make Super Shadow? Well, as aforementioned, a shadow tells you where to go to find the light. And so we took this as a shadow serving as a symbol of hope, a sign of light and of good things to come, which matches the very intention of Shadow's creation, which was to become a champion of hope for humanity. But when looking for a concept that also carries that message of hope, we actually came across several very crucial details that we left out on why a shadow works for Shadow so well. Details that will help to make Super Shadow's concept more impactful. You see, concepts related to shadows tend to evoke themes of the past, with phrases like shadows of the past, meant to reflect regret, consequences, or lingering memories. There's also chasing shadows, which usually means chasing a feeling, or trying to recapture what was lost. Both of these eloquently describe Shadow's journey across several games, with the grief of losing Maria, and his efforts to even bring her back in Shadow Generations. Furthermore, when Shadow lost his memory, you could say he saw himself as only a shadow of what he once was. The real Shadow is gone, and this copy is only a shadow of his former self. He was living in someone else's shadow, or living in the shadows of the past, thinking he was merely a fake, a shadow android, and that he was taking the place of the actual Shadow's legacy. But there's also the aspect of shadows that evoke an uneasy sense of being followed, with phrases like shadow at every turn, or looming like a shadow, both of which convey the themes of being stalked and observed, with a looming fear or dread that grows ever closer. This fits the entirety of Black Doom and his watch over Shadow, acting as a dark presence that haunts him throughout Shadow 05. You could even attribute those aspects to his memories of Maria, that gruesome image that would haunt him for quite some time. And finally, with phrases like out of the shadows, which plays on the idea of breaking free from a period of darkness and utter confusion. This represents the end of Shadow's journey, as we see in moments from 06 and Shadow Generations. The act of breaking free from the pain that possessed him for so long, and coming out of the shadows to stand in the light. All of this is important for understanding that while shadows can mean hope and act as a sign of light, they are also used to capture feelings of regret, loss, and emerging from that loss. In other words, Shadow is still the perfect thematic concept for Shadow the Hedgehog. And so for Super Shadow, now we can take everything that makes Shadow a shadow and evolve it with the power of chaos. So, what element or part of nature can represent hope, but is amplified in its meaning? What is paired with feelings of loss and is used with metaphors about lingering memories of the past, but takes it to a new level? And finally, we'll also need something that contains an energy that's more chaotic and powerful in nature. Yes, if the ultimate life form is the shadow, then the ultimate life form, when granted the immense power of chaos, is a star. A star can carry the hopes and dreams of people in the form of a wish, as you often see with phrases like wish upon a star. Hope is simply the strong desire and feeling that something good will happen, and in a cosmic or even magical sense, it is a wish. Hope, when empowered, is a wish. If Shadow is hope, then Super Shadow is a wish. And in Maria's dying breath, she bestowed upon her champion of hope her wish for humanity, that it is loved, protected, and a place where Shadow can call his home. It is a wish that Shadow had forgotten for so long, but as he donned this new golden form, it was a wish not only restored, but made real. Super Shadow is the power to make wishes, Maria's wishes, come true. It is the ultimate power of hope and a bringer of light, Maria's light. But that light, Maria, had died a long time ago. Even so, the memory of her glow and warmth is still felt even today, still shining through Super Shadow. It's just as they say, the past is a distant star. In other words, although the past may be gone, its light, the memories, the love is still shining bright in our minds today. This plays upon the real-life phenomena of distant stars whose light still shines even though the original star had died so long ago. This phenomena is not common with every star, especially the ones in our own Milky Way galaxy, but it is definitely the case for those far-off galaxies with stars whose light still shines even though the star died millions of years ago. Light takes a while to travel through the seemingly infinite expanse of space, and so that's why this happens. The point is, many stars are actually just the light left behind by the actual star that's gone. And so many use it as a metaphor for the past, lingering memories, and the idea of something good, something bright, coming from something so tragic. Like the beautiful light from a dead star, or the savior of humanity that emerged from his dark past, or the shining super shadow who carries the light of Maria even when she's gone. And not only does a star match the space motif with Maria as the sun, Gerald as the moon, and now Super Shadow as the star, but it is also a representation of hope, the past, and also harbors an insane amount of literal chaotic energy. As many, not all, but many stars within our universe contain several chaotic traits such as unstable energy or erratic and rapid rotation, chaotic pulsations of light and energy, and so much more. In the end, everything is wrapped up in a neat thematic bow of light and darkness, with our two pillars, the sunlight and the shadow. So, if the ultimate life form is the shadow, then that makes Maria the sun, Rouge the bleeding heart flower, Omega the metal, Gerald the moon, and Super Shadow the star.
I am Shadow the Hedgehog. This is the destiny I choose. Now, to end this! Ha!